Tonight we have something really good, a hot topic in the news this week. He's been charged with crime. This is a show where I try to educate real stories. Thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. I have a great story planned for you tonight with my good friend and great attorney, Billy Skinner. He's agreed to come tonight to help educate us about some things that are going on in the courthouse. He's experienced about 3 trials with 3 different results and 3 different people that he's either participated in or watched the trials. And we want to talk about them as case studies just to get your feedback and to try to educate you about what's going on in the criminal justice system. So without any further ado, I will just introduce you to Billy.
Thank you, Ms. King. I wanted to talk tonight and hopefully get some input from your viewers as well regarding 3 separate cases that I had in between Memorial Day and July 4th. And 3 very different cases. The only thing that my clients had in common were that they were all men, but they were men, 2 separate races, and then I guess 2 of them, 1 white male, 2 Hispanic males, but one was a Mexican American who had been born in Los Angeles, moved back to Mexico for most of his life, and then come to Houston to seek a better life. And one of the things that really jumped out at me through these 3 different trials is how the potential jurors perceived my clients based solely on how they looked, the color of their skin, or how they dressed, and also how jurors reacted to the different defensive theories based on stereotypes.
Wow. So really, it's on stereotypes. And one of the things that's interesting about you bringing that out is that people who are charged with crimes or close to people charged with crimes never think about the psychology of stereotypes. You know, it's just my child is innocent, I'm innocent, prove that I'm innocent, you're a good lawyer. And they never really think about how deeply we have to get into it. You know, like what our client looks like, how our client will be perceived by potential jurors, how our client is even perceived by prosecutors.
Absolutely.
And the prosecutors a lot of times perceive our clients very similar to potential jurors. And a lot of people are always frustrated saying, well, it's just black people in the criminal justice system, because it's the way the prosecutors perceive them and the jurors. And we know that, I know for me, if I have a white client, I'm happier because I know that they'll be treated fairer. And it's unfortunate that it's like that, not for my white clients, because I want the system to work for you, but it's unfortunate that it doesn't work for everybody all the time, and that we have to be mindful of that in our representation of our clients. But it's hard to have that discussion with your client.
Absolutely. And you know, the one thing that I know that you do and that I do is that we are realistic about the challenge that we face. And we're honest with our clients about the challenges that we face. And race is one of those issues that no one wants to talk about, but it's real. It's particularly real in Houston because we have this melting pot of people from around the world.
And although we have this melting pot of people, as you're saying, we have a concentration of the same people at the courthouse. The like-mindedness of the prosecutors is overwhelming to me. You know, like if one prosecutor doesn't like me because I'm opinionated or I fight for my clients, then everybody doesn't like me. If one judge says that she works hard or just says anything that might be wrong, then everybody has the same thought. There's no independence of thought and idea, and just based on experiences. It's this mushroom of negativity and evilness, and I think that that's sometimes what people perceive, and we need to elevate our thinking in that regard.
I agree with you 100%, and what I'm always shocked by is how you see individuals in the courthouse who maybe do have different backgrounds, that that work for the district attorney's office. But yet it's like they all share a brain. And not all of them. There are some of them that think unique thoughts.
But they don't get to act on it very much.
That's
so
right.
they might even think a unique thought, but they still have to tell you, well, even though I agree with you and I see it your way, I can't handle your client that way. I have to handle your client the way this cookie cutter says to handle it.
And how many times have you had someone say to you, well, I think your client did it?
Right.
Well, that's all well and good, and you're entitled to your own thoughts and opinions, but it's not about what you think my client may have done. It's what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
And I think that gets lost in our system, and I think, quite frankly, those of us, you being a champion and a leader of this, those of us who fight for our clients find ourselves in these jury trials that probably could have been resolved some other way if we had people who were just willing to look at it from a more well-rounded perspective.
Right.
And not judging our clients on the surface.
Right.
One of the challenges that I find with my clients, and we'll get into these 3 cases in a moment, is that a client will say to me, I didn't do it. I know the truth will set me free. And I have to say to them, while I wish that was right, and in your high school government class, that's what your teacher taught you, that's not the way it is.
Right.
That inside this building that we function in, you're actually, and Jay-Z said it in a rap song, I thought this was America, people, right? But
Right.
you're guilty until you can prove your innocence.
Right.
And what you said, and what will be borne out in these 3 cases I'm going to talk about is, unfortunately, sometimes it's easier to prove your innocence if you're a middle-aged white man.
Right. And that's just unfortunate. But I am optimistic, and I know you are too, Billy, that people will become more fair. I mean, we started off with a Constitution and a Bill of Rights that was based on fairness, although it still wasn't being used fairly against minorities or black people at the time. I believe that it's still, in principle, fair. And we tried to get there in the 60s and the 70s, and something got lost in the mean new millennium, the
Right.
90s and then the 2000s. I mean, it was just crazy. And at my age, I'm disillusioned on the one hand, but still hopeful that something will happen positive, that we try to give each person the fairness in which our Constitution and our principles require. So let's go into your 3 cases. Which one do you want to talk about first?
It would probably be easier for me if we talked about them in sequential order,
Certainly.
right? So the first case that I tried right after Memorial Day was a Central American man who was charged with indecency with a child by exposure, which is a little bit misleading but a little bit truthful with the charge. Essentially, if someone exposes themselves to an adult, that's a misdemeanor, indecent exposure. But if the person is a child, which could mean someone 14 years old who, quite frankly, may or may not be childlike, then it becomes a felony. And as part of that, if you were to take any form of plea bargain, then you have to register as a sex offender. And we could probably have an entire show on the plight of registering as a sex offender, and maybe that's a good idea. But this person truly had maintained from the moment I met him that he was innocent. And he had hired another lawyer before me who did some good work and is a good lawyer, but maybe didn't believe enough, or maybe saw some things that, quite frankly, shook their own confidence in the case. I don't know, but my client wanted a trial, right? And the unique thing about it is that the gentleman was pretty. He was, when you see like the soccer players in the World Cup who they're built and they have perfect hair and they have the perfect little beard,
He was a pretty guy.
He was a pretty guy. Also super well dressed, probably better dressed than I was. Really put together. And one of the things that we had to overcome and that we were honest about is that this macho flair that women would love, right? Every lady in my office thought it was fabulous when he came in for meetings.
I wish I would have seen it.
Yeah, exactly. But that flair can be held against you because of these stereotypes that we're talking about. And I voir dire on those issues. And your audience may or may not know, but when we talk about voir dire, that's when 60 strangers, 62 strangers, maybe 100 strangers come in and you get to select those people for your jury. And one of the things that I had to own was that my client was good looking, and that this accusation was made by a group of young girls that may or may not have thought he was good looking. And there was just this bizarre dynamic there. But the thing that really jumped out as we worked through jury selection and throughout the trial, and then ultimately at the end of the trial, a hung jury, when we talked to the jurors, was that there were very divided thoughts on how my client was perceived before the trial ever began.
Wow.
And then and I can't say this because I'm not a psychologist, but my fear is that people sitting there have these stereotypes or life experiences in their brain, and then it's hard for them to overcome that even when they hear evidence that may be directly opposite.
Let me ask
what
you
their
this.
initial view was.
So do you think that people think because he's a pretty boy that he would expose his genitals to some girls? Because to me, in my mind, just off the cuff, I think a pretty boy wouldn't do it because he wouldn't need to.
Exactly, and I shared that thought. One of the things that I had said to the prosecutors along the way is like, look, this guy doesn't have to beg anyone to look at his winky, right?
Right.
I mean, I think he could probably put out auditions and a lot of people would do it. Not to mention, this guy's married.
Right.
And his wife is here, and she
Right.
is supportive.
Right.
And she too is an attractive young woman.
Right.
I agree. That was one of the weird things, but part of the interesting piece at the end was the way the jurors were split. White men holding it against this Latin pretty boy,
Punk,
for
yeah,
lack of
pretty
a better
boy, yeah.
word, like Golden Boy, like the boxer Oscar De La Hoya, right? Golden Boy Productions, holding it against him. Yeah, I can see a guy like that. I think guys like that are more likely to be short-tempered. It was all those stereotypes. And for me, someone who's tried very hard to be open-minded, right? I was shocked by that because I would think that the men would place themselves in their shoes and say, wow, what if this 15-year-old girl said, and it was believable, that I exposed my penis to them?
Right.
What if I didn't do it?
Right. How would I defend that?
Right, and one of the ways we did defend it, we used, part of our defensive theory was it just couldn't happen this way, right? But my client testified, and something that I know that you understand and believe in, and I think it's important for your audience members to know, is that in the United States in 2014, if you're not willing to take the stand and say you didn't do it, you might as well get ready to go to prison.
Right.
And
because people are short-sighted now, and they believe that you're guilty until proven innocent. Even though everyone does what's politically correct and takes an oath and says, yes, I will hold them to the standard of innocent until proven guilty. If they hear anything, you're guilty. You know, so you know that you have to start off guilty if you're a good defense lawyer, and you have to try to work your way down to not guilty instead of the other way around.
And I totally agree. And one of the things that was unique about the trial, and we may very well have a retrial, I don't know, I hope we don't, so my client doesn't have to go through that stress again, was we got down to the underwear the person was wearing. And the fact that my client's story had been the very same from the moment law enforcement came in contact with him until he testified at trial. But no one wanted to believe him, a man who is college educated, who has a good job, who's driving a nice car. He was in gym clothes because he was coming from the gym, right? That was all, that meant nothing. His life experience and his work coming from another country to this country meant nothing. The word of a 14-year-old girl meant more to the state, to the police officer, to the prosecutor, to the people involved than this man who is a professional. And one of the things that I think our society still believes is that your good deeds should count for you. But I know you've seen this with your clients, and I see it with my clients, that none of their good deeds matter when they walk through that courthouse door.
None of them matter. And people don't understand that because we live in a society outside the courthouse where your good deeds still do matter.
Sure.
If you're a good guy on your job, people say he's a good guy or she's a good girl. And so you give them the benefit of the doubt. But when you walk in that courthouse, that goes away. You don't get that unless you belong to a small class where the prosecutors will look at your cup as being half full. But that's a small class of people.
And I think that class may be shrinking.
Yeah, it's shrinking.
Quite frankly.
It's been shrinking in the 20-something years I've been down there.
I represent a lot of young people who parents have invested a lot of money in them, and they pick up some what I view as a ticky-tacky misdemeanor. For example, possession of marijuana that our Democratic candidate for district attorney, Kim Ogg, has come out and said, I'm going to put together a program where these young people who quite frankly believe marijuana ought to be legal, and it is legal for recreational use in 2 states and medicinally in 27 states, I'm not going to mess up these people's future with a criminal conviction.
Right.
And I'm not going to waste taxpayer resources prosecuting them.
Right.
But as it sits today, if your daughter, who's a very accomplished young woman, destined for great things, right?
Right.
Exactly, and your hard work and everyone involved. And my sons, who eventually I hope are where your daughter is, one little, tiny gram of marijuana could make them look like they're a drug user.
Right.
Should those kids be prosecuted over that? Should we, I'm not going to say cripple their financial future, but if it were a felony, if a young person had a small amount of cocaine and it was a felony, that could sink their ability to make a real living and to earn money for the rest of their lives. Should we sink these young people over one tiny little lapse in judgment?
And the thing that's interesting that you mentioned that is that I've mentioned on my show on many occasions that when I was in high school in the 70s, I graduated from high school in 76, it was a felony. A little amount of marijuana was a felony, and nobody crippled us like that. I am from San Antonio, but if someone had weed or marijuana in high school, the police stopped us because everybody had cars from 15 on, they would throw it away. And it was a felony back then. I didn't realize that, but I'm just telling you, beer in the car, weed in the car, they threw it away. They did not bother young people and messing their futures up when it was a much more serious crime in the 70s. But yet now we've had 40, 50 years of marijuana usage. We know that it doesn't hurt you more than alcohol does, just based on everybody using it and knowing what the consequences are. And it's a misdemeanor, a low Class B misdemeanor now, but yet we get 100,000 times more arrests based on that when it was a felony in the 70s. That's what's amazing to me.
And I think one of the things that's scary about not only that,
because it just seems racial to me. I mean, it just seems, and it's not always racial, but it just seems like a way to hurt people instead of really caring about society. It just doesn't seem like it's honorable.
Right, I agree. And before I get back to my indecency with a child trial, I want to tell you this thing that I've been doing, this kind of Billy's social experiment. I have a nice car, right? I'm a
Yes.
middle-aged white guy.
Right.
I'm often driving dressed like this.
Right.
I decided that at the beginning of the year, I wasn't going to put my new registration sticker on my car.
Interesting.
That I was going to let it be expired, and I was going to see how long I could drive before I got pulled over. Because my clients, if they're of color, or if they're young, or if they happen to live in a neighborhood that's not the greatest neighborhood, they always get pulled over for their
Expired registration.
Riding dirty, right?
Riding dirty.
So I decided I'm going to see how long this middle-aged white guy can ride dirty without getting pulled over. Today's the middle of August.
Right.
Right? Not once.
And
I
you've
have
been doing
it.
since January.
Since January. I have it in my glove box. If I get pulled over, I can get it out and show it. But my thing is, I ought to get pulled over.
You ought to get pulled over.
The standard ought to be the same.
If they're really looking for expired registration.
Which you and I know they're not.
They're not. They're actually looking at the person driving the car.
Absolutely.
Right.
And those stereotypes, the scary part about those stereotypes that we see the police using on the street are the same stereotypes that get ratcheted up, I guess, for lack of a better word, for someone who's charged with a serious felony. And so one of the things that I thought was intriguing about the indecency with a child case was that because my client looked a certain way, even when he testified, and I think he did a fantastic job. He told the truth. He was honest. He answered the hard questions. He subjected himself to the cross-examination of a good young prosecutor. His words were still filtered through that physical or visual filter that those jurors had brought in with them. And I expected more, right? Because we had a group of smart people on our jury. And I was intrigued by how they divided themselves. The men were more critical of my client than the women were. The older people on the jury, one of the staunchest jurors on my side was about a 60-year-old white man who was a banker, right? He is kind of one of those guys that's just questioning everything in America. Has the government taken too many of my rights away, right? And
wow, how unusual. He put himself in the position of rights being taken away.
He did.
Because what's unusual, which is intriguing to me in America, is that we want to take everybody else's rights away as long as it doesn't affect me. I feel like all of the negativity in the world, all of the negativity in the United States, like against President Obama, is hate, hate, hate because it's him. He's a black man. It's easy to do. You don't relate to him.
Easy target.
Easy target. But when it was President Bush, then everybody was for him. You know, I find that a lot of the people in the majority cannot put themselves in the position of a minority person. So I find that intriguing that your 60-year-old white male banker could relate to your client enough to say, you're taking my rights away from me.
Right, and this is something that I've seen not only in these 3 trials, but I thought it was trending, and now I'm comfortable saying I believe it is a trend, is that, believe it or not, I think that these people that are on the far right may, in a weird way, be able to help you and I, who are over here on the left, and minority people, because they're looking at the government in a somewhat similar way, is that this very conservative, I don't want to say Tea Party, but very conservative people want the government out of their lives.
Right.
Right? And our clients who are being charged with a crime by the government and possibly locked up by the government want the government out of their lives. And I found an interesting correlation between men like this banker who, you know, when I first saw he was one of my 12, I kind of cringed like, ugh, old white guy.
Right.
Right? But he listened, and he was open-minded, and he was critical, and he graded everyone's homework. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so
it's what you want in a
right,
juror.
you do. He was fair and impartial.
Right. He
right?
graded everybody.
He did. Me, the
you,
prosecutor,
your client,
the judge,
the prosecutors, the
everyone.
judge, the system, and that's what you want a juror to do.
And then what was intriguing was that some of the people that you think would be more liberal, I have found in cases involving children, whether that child be 14 or that child be 12 or 10, they are going to believe the child. They believe that if they do anything other than find the person accused guilty, that they've somehow turned their back on this child. And that's one of the things that I've had to share with my clients is, even though you and I may believe and may very well know that you didn't commit a crime, the word of a child is powerful.
It is. Can you hold that thought, Billy? Thank you. I see that there's a caller waiting. Thank you for calling Truth and Justice with Vivian King. Please state your comment.
Yeah, how you doing, Ms. King and Mr. Skinner?
Good evening.
Okay, I just want to chime in on this here. I want to talk about, now, you know, Robin Goodman, the good comedian, he passed away the other day.
Yes, sir.
All I see on Facebook is, you know, Robin Goodman, you know. Now, I mean Robin Williams. But when it comes to the Mike Brown, you don't see as much as on that. I think that's more important that Robin Williams, he took his own life. Now, Mike Brown, he got shot down by the police, and I think that merited more attention than somebody, you know, decided to want to commit suicide.
Oh, I agree. I understand your point on that. I do appreciate the tributes that are being paid to Robin Williams because he gave us so much joy and so much laughter for so many years. And being an older person closer to Robin's age, I definitely was teary-eyed when I found out he died because I loved him from Mork and Mindy all the way on. And then I have different tears for Max Brown, so they're equally as painful to me. And it's really painful that Robin Williams gave so many years of laughter and that he was so sad himself that he would want to kill himself. And, you know, of course, me being kind of a civil rights activist or wanting to be included in white America myself and being a part of knowing when we weren't included, I know that Robin Williams and Billy Crystal gave Whoopi Goldberg her start. And so in terms of mainstream, you know, she was in New York. She looked a little different back then in the 70s, but they brought her into prominence. They would have her on specials with them. They made sure she came to Hollywood. She got her own shows. So I appreciated their civil rights consciousness. And so not only their funny bones, because I love them both Billy Crystal and Robin Williams, but I appreciated them. You know, because a lot of blacks didn't accept Whoopi Goldberg, but they brought them into the mainstream. And so I always appreciated that because, you know, all little black girls wish that somebody would bring them into the mainstream. So I appreciated that.
Do you remember Robin Harris?
Absolutely. And I was sad when he died because I knew him. Small world, small world. You know, of course, Baby Kids. Of course I do. I'm a student of comedy, so I'm a fan of comedy. So, yes. And the Max Brown issue is unfortunately a redundant, reoccurring issue, but I think that the citizens of that town, or even though I'm an anti-violence person, we live in a violent time. And so what I appreciate, though, about that city is that they are taking it to the street and they're going to make something happen. They're not just waiting for Al Sharpton to come down from New York. I mean, they reacted to the police. They're still reacting to the police because the police won't give out information about this police officer. They're sheltering him, but yet they have this kid killed in the street who had his arms up. So I appreciate the fact that the people at least care, because one of the things that I'm always saddened about Houstonians is that we don't seem to care when something happens. You know, as long as it doesn't happen to our kids or us specifically.
Well, I care. I do care.
Right, I know, but I'm just saying in large scales. And I'm just saying in large scales, we care. We might have 100 people at a rally. I mean, but they actually really took it to the street.
Yeah, in a city like Houston, we need 100,000 people.
Yeah, I mean, we have 4 million people here, so if something bad happens, 100,000 people ought to show up and not 100 people, where the news can barely, you know, it doesn't even look like anybody's there. So I do appreciate that they took it to the street in you know, that's Detroit, right? Where is it in? Detroit? Max Brown?
I think it's in Detroit.
Yeah, they took it to the street.
Well, and then they have in St. Louis, they have a similar issue going on right now. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to do as a people, and I would never condone violence on any front, but one of the things we're going to have to do as a people is, we've talked about on this show before, get out and vote, right?
Right.
But we got to be active in between elections too.
Exactly.
If something's wrong, we need to stand up, because if we don't, it will be this slope that we're talking about. The color of your skin should not decide how you are treated.
Right.
Period. End of sentence.
I was actually, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to drug you, but I was actually listening to a radio show earlier today, and they had Robert Tolan on. And, you know, that was a miscarriage of justice right there.
Right.
He came on the show and he talked, but it's got to stop.
Yeah, Robbie Tolan didn't get the attention he needed here, and but luckily he's getting a second chance, it appears.
I just hope, you know, justice is served, you know, because that's what it shows all about. All we want to see is justice.
Right. And we have to keep making noise. And so, you know, I'm doing my part to try to make noise.
Yes, of course you are.
And thank you for watching and spreading the word. And Billy's trying to do his part. Mr. Skinner's doing his part to represent his clients and bring up the problems that we have so we can be more mindful of them.
Okay. You know, every time Billy come on, you know, I call him every time. He on there. You know, he's a good man, you know.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One of the things we need people to do, too, that you and I need, is that we need people to come to jury service.
Right, and come and be fair and impartial. And say you can be fair and impartial, because you can. We all can be. And not just let one type of person who knows how to politically correct say, I can be fair and impartial, but not. I mean, people need to participate in their system or keep their mouths closed.
That's a great segue, Ms. King.
Thank you. Tracy, call back if we hit you right again. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
one of the things I wanted to talk about on the second case that I tried, it was an assault family violence case that involved choking. And your audience may or may not know this, but if I'm married, if I go home and I punch my wife in the face as hard as I can with my fist and just give her a big old black eye, well, that's a misdemeanor, right? That's a Class A misdemeanor. But if I put my hand on her throat at all and impede her airway, then that becomes a felony, even if I've never been arrested in my life.
Right.
And let's face it, my wife's a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, but if she gets mad at me and she goes in there and she chokes herself and puts some marks on her neck and she calls 911 and puts on a good show when the cops come out, Billy's going to jail.
You're going to jail.
And then I'll have to prove I'm innocent, right? I'll have to hire you.
You can do it. I'm there for you.
But the thing is, in this case it was a little bit unique because my client, the first client I talked about was from Central America. This client was truly from Mexico. He had been born in Los Angeles. He moved back to Mexico where he lived most of his life. And then he came to Houston. While he was in Mexico, ironically, he had worked in Alaska.
Wow.
Manual labor, willing to go, trying to provide for his family, but he came to Houston because our building market is so huge. But he was stereotypically Mexican. Very nice guy, very soft-spoken, family man.
Construction worker.
Construction worker. His sisters love him. He listens to his sisters, right? But he was charged with this crime of choking his wife. And we were talking about with the caller about race and how people perceive it. And when I was talking about race during voir dire, I had a lady admit that she was racially biased. And quite frankly, I was shocked because I try it all the time, but that doesn't mean it's going to work. But this lady, who was a petite, mid-40s, not white, but not ethnic, kind of hard to tell. A lot of Houstons like that, right? She just raised her hand and she said, I have to be honest, Mr. Skinner, because your client is Hispanic, I think that he would be more, as I sit here now, I'm more likely to think that he would assault his wife than if he were not. And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I thanked her for being honest and then asked if anyone else felt that way. And a couple of other people reluctantly raised their hand and said, me too. And I was shocked by that, but I was also pleasantly surprised. And I hope that as we continue to fight the fight, that more people will be honest. Because look, if you're a racist, look, I don't like you. Right? Period. I don't care what color you are. If you're a racist, Billy Skinner doesn't like you. But I want to know it before you're sitting in that jury box. Because we want people that are fair and impartial. Look, if I were not a white man, right, I might not like white men. And I just have to be honest. You know what? That guy reminds me of my middle school coach who I hated, and I just can't be fair. But I would need to say it. And I thought it was particularly intriguing that because it was a domestic violence crime, that this lady thought that he would be more inclined to do that just because he was of Mexican descent.
Very interesting.
And the irony of us being here in Texas, where even though Texans don't want to admit it, this was Mexico.
Texas was Mexico.
Right? The irony of that just really sat in, right? I mean, our Texas culture, you grew up in San Antonio.
Of course, right
Very
in the heart of it.
Deep Hispanic heritage, good people, great people, families, religion, all good things. Focus on
completely
the right
melting pot Chicanos. I mean, been there since the beginning of Texas.
Sure, yeah.
Tejas.
Yeah, they're as native as anyone other than the Native Americans. But to see that man would be judged that way was a moment of honesty that I appreciated, but also kind of a sad moment to think that this person is being held to a different standard simply because of where he's from. And
it's refreshing to know that she was honest, so you could strike her from that jury. But the thing that's sad, and I'm sad with you, that we know that she would want her husband or son to be treated fairly. She would never want anyone to prejudge him just because he's charged with that crime.
Right, and she was an educated woman.
Right.
I mean, number one, she was a woman who was honest about it, right? If it had been some hillbilly-looking guy, I would have, like Hank Hill, the stereotype on
Right.
King of the Hill. I'm like, oh, okay. Doesn't surprise me, right? But this well-educated, petite woman who's willing to say, you know what, I have this bias and prejudice was really, really intriguing to me.
That is intriguing. Well, let's talk about your third guy.
The third guy is intriguing on different levels because we had what I'm afraid is going to become a more and more common case in Houston, charged aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, but it stemmed from basically a road rage incident where my client, 6'1", big white country boy from Wyoming, in a big old pickup truck, gets in a skirmish of sorts with a man driving one of these fast little Mustangs, right? And they're not being nice to each other on the road. My client contends that the Mustang bumped him. Mustang contends that my client hit his car. What happens is they end up on the side of the highway, the beginning of rush hour traffic, and my client is accused of taking a gun and pointing it in the face of the other person. And that's where you see a different type of stereotyping, right? Because quite frankly, he looks like the kind of white guy that would have a gun with him, right? Big old pickup truck, big old guy, wearing blue jeans.
Right.
There's a stereotype there. Intriguing fact to this case was that the complaining witness was a small Central American man. And there was kind of a battle of 911 calls. My client had called 911 immediately, and in fact was on his phone when the police showed up. But he told them from the beginning, I have a weapon in my truck. I have a gun in my truck. It's down in the side by where you could put a soda or whatever you put down there. But I never pointed it at him. But the complaining witness said, oh yeah, he pointed it at me. I saw him, it was a gun like this. And from the beginning, the police took the complaining witness's story and ran with it. And the only way we were able to get this, for my client to have his moment, was to end up having a jury trial. And it brought out two really hot topics, or what I think are hot topics in Houston: road rage, right? Any of us that drive very far have experienced that driver that we don't like and we don't want driving that way around our family, and guns.
Yep.
And I can't say this loud enough or to enough people, but if you have a gun, you should leave it at home.
You're more likely to use it.
You are. If you have a handgun, there's this old classic rock song, handguns are made for killing, right? They are. I'm a gun owner. Quite frankly, I believe that people should have rights to guns. But I don't know that our society needs handguns. Right. And if you have a gun and someone can see it, you are much more likely to find yourself facing a very serious felony charge.
That's true.
And you have to fight to defend yourself. One of the things that came out of this case that I thought was intriguing was that the jury at the end said they didn't really believe either one of the people.
Well, the right result happened, not
involved.
guilty.
Not guilty.
If they didn't believe either one of them.
I know, and that part was good. One of the things that I thought was unique was that the prosecutors in that case had not met with their complaining witnesses until after we picked a jury.
Really? That's awful.
And to think about this, that our clients face these
2 to 20 or 2 to 10? 2 to 20 years in prison.
with a deadly weapon,
With a
which
deadly
means
weapon,
you're going to
you'd have to
spend
do
half the time.
Half the time
right,
in prison.
In prison.
And they haven't even talked to their witness.
Not in person.
Wow.
Somebody talked to them on the phone. But this is one of the things that I think it's important for the people, right? To know about our system is that here in Harris County, there are so many people charged with crimes that it is such a sausage-making factory that these prosecutors often either don't have the time or have been reassigned or for whatever reason get a long way down the road before they've put eyeballs on their witnesses, right?
Right.
How many years have you been a lawyer, Ms. King?
22 or 23.
Board certified?
Right.
Right. Are you going to put someone on the stand that you've never met with?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You wouldn't put someone on the stand that you've only met with them once, right?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I would never do that.
And you would never think about taking away someone's freedom just based on a report from a third party.
Right. Especially in a situation like you're talking about, because the police officer is just taking a report. So the police officer doesn't know if it's truthful or not. So, I mean, the DAs or someone has a duty then to try to investigate to make sure that this is a truthful statement.
And I think the thing that really jumped out at me, and now we have a white man, so we can't really say, well, race was involved.
Race was involved from the jury standpoint, but not
Right.
from the prosecutor standpoint.
Right, or from the police officer's standpoint.
Right.
But the part to me that is scary for citizens is that once that ball gets rolling, the only way you may be able to stop it is a jury trial.
And what did your jurors, how did you find your jurors different? What were their comments after this case?
I thought that it was intriguing that this case differed from the other in that they really didn't like the way the case was prosecuted. And they really didn't like the way the road rage played more of a part than the gun itself. And there was a third-party witness who said he saw my client point a gun
Wow.
at the complaining.
Now, was a third-party witness in one of these vehicles or just a stranger?
He had worked with the complaining witness. And the jury said that they wanted to hear more from the government about what that guy saw.
Now, was he in the car with the complainant?
No, he wasn't. He was in another car. They were coming from work, and this all happened. They were going the same way. They knew one another. But
I find it interesting. I hate to say this, Billy, from the complainant's standpoint. How would he know that this guy had a gun in his car? And I guess that's probably why the prosecutors never let it go. What do you think?
I honestly don't know. I think what happened is if
Or unless your guy did it with his hand or something.
I don't know if you can hold your cell phone
Okay, yeah.
and it
Looks
be
like a
like
gun.
it.
Right.
But if it was a dark alley and I walked out and I was doing this at
Right,
you,
yeah.
you
I might think that's a gun.
you might think it's a gun. And quite frankly, if I did this in the wrong place, the police would shoot me.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sight
Like they did in New
unseen.
York with
Sure.
Amage Diago or whatever his name was. They did that to him.
Right. But I believe that he saw the gun in the door of my client's truck
At what point, though?
when they stopped on the side of the road.
So you think when he opened the car, he could see it?
I think when he opened the car, he could see it. And I know that the individual in the car was afraid because, quite frankly, I would be afraid if this person came barreling over to my car.
Right.
But he testified that he pointed the gun at him. And his friend testified that he pointed the gun at him. But there were enough discrepancies with all the other testimony. And what I thought was intriguing, and this is where I wonder if race benefited me, was that even though a couple of the jurors said that they just flat out didn't believe my client's version of the facts, I wonder if he got that benefit
Right.
from taking the stand, from talking about who he was, from talking about the way he works in the aerospace industry. I wonder if that was extra credit. I wonder if that client would have been treated differently had he been one of the prior two that I tried in that
Right.
4-week span.
Right.
The polarizing part to that piece was guns.
Right.
And in Vordar, guns were a big issue because we were able to get strikes for cause because some people said, if I hear road rage and I hear gun, I can't be fair because I don't believe people have the right to have guns in their cars. They may have the right to have guns in their houses, but I don't think they have the right to have guns in their cars. And I can't really argue with them, right? Even though I know I have a right to have a gun in my car, and in Texas you don't have to have a special permit or you don't have to have any of that. If it's in your car, it's okay, as long as you're not committing another crime. Possession.
And you're not a felon.
A felon, right? Or you're not
committing
in
another
possession of a drug, or you're not driving under the influence of alcohol or some other drug. And so it was one of those oddly polarizing cases where this weird Houston thing all came together, right? We have a complaining witness who's from Central America. We have a person who's been charged with a crime. They call them defendants. You and I don't like to call them that, right?
But a white male accused.
A white male
from Wyoming.
accused in a big Chevy pickup truck.
Was he coming from work?
He was. They all were.
Everybody was coming from work,
Right.
which helps. When everybody's working, that helps.
That should help everybody.
That should help. That helps everybody's credibility. Wow.
And so that case kind of restored my faith in the system, in that if it doesn't all add up, that they being the jurors are willing to think, hey, I'm not going to mark this man with an F for the rest of my life. But I'm going to kind of turn a question on you.
Sure.
And I would like to know your experience in this. My experience tells me that when it's a felony, jurors are more willing to grade the homework of the police, but when it's a misdemeanor, they don't care as much.
That's interesting. I really haven't had that experience. Billy, now that I'm thinking about it, sometimes in misdemeanor cases, because they might like the defendant, sometimes they might think that police officers have acted too quickly. So I think the prosecutors lose more misdemeanors because I think they do grade the police officers, because sometimes the police officers, especially when the probable cause is marijuana, smell, I think sometimes they wonder, are they just saying that? You know, I think they do grade them hard, but I agree with you that they definitely grade them hard on felonies. When they're thinking of taking someone's rights away from them, especially a working person. And I found Houston jurors to be fair in this regard. Whether your client is black or white or Hispanic, if they're a hard-working person and they have no record and they testify, I think jurors bend over backwards to be fair. And so therefore, sometimes they have to believe that the police officer made a mistake, and they're tough on they grade them toughly because they really want to see themselves in that person's position. Even if the client, our client, the accused, is black. I don't find, if they're a working person in a road rage type of situation. Now, let me tell you something I find interesting. I'm in a non-death capital murder right now. I'm surprised at how many people have concealed handgun license that are on jurors, and they're overwhelmingly white.
I'm not surprised, and here's why. Because I tell my Houston friends all the time, I grew up near Longview, right? Which is, I refer to it as the real Texas.
Really?
Right? All those people have concealed handgun licenses. My 75-year-old mother has a concealed handgun license.
Wow.
Because she lives out in the country. And when my dad passed away, the two things we did was make sure she had an alarm on her house, and she wanted to be able to protect herself. Because if you call 911 where my mother lives, it's going to be about 15 minutes before anybody gets there. Period.
But she doesn't need a concealed handgun license for that.
But she thought she did, and now it's her safety net. It's what, and I agree with you. I think
because now the prosecutors run their records, okay, and they let you know, because on your record you can see on your driver's license, I guess, when they run them, that
Absolutely.
They have CHLs, and so it might be, say, like if you have 15 blacks on a jury that are professionals that are working, you won't see that number of concealed handgun license, but you'll see it in all the white males seem to have it. If they're over a certain age, like over 40, and they're working white males, I mean, they all have concealed handgun license.
And I have defended probably 5 white males in this age range you're talking about who had concealed handgun licenses, who were charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
Road rage.
And
that's what's scary to me.
Or home rage.
Home rage. Well, that's what's scary to me is, as you know, even if I have a wreck with somebody, they're gonna pull a gun on me. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just so crazy because you're scared to even have a wreck and stop if it gets late at night.
Because you might be safer to keep going.
To keep going because you don't know what people are gonna do because everybody has a gun.
And that goes back to that polarizing piece where I think we're at in America and maybe in Texas, is that why do those people feel such a desire to protect themselves?
Right. And why do they feel the desire to do it with a car accident or racing someone down the road or someone clipping them off. I mean, to me, that's just crazy. I mean, to me, you should be focusing on where you're going. Now, don't get me wrong, people clip me off and I get mad on the road, but I just try to listen to some good music and just trying to get where I'm going. I'm not going to give them my energy. And what's amazing to me, even if I had a gun, I wouldn't give them my energy because I just don't want that. I had a wreck about a month ago. Somebody hit me coming to an Astros game and hit me hard in a big old truck. He was taking his son to the Astros. And I have a little bitty car, like a little BMW 128. And he dented it a little bit. And I was like, we exchanged information. And I'm not calling. I didn't get hurt. I was like, thank you, God, I didn't get hurt. And I didn't care. I mean, I had another little dent on it anyway that I had done hitting a pole. So even though he added another one to it and I could have gotten 2 for 1 fix, I'm not going to call on it. It's just not that big of an issue to me. And I'm sure he's relieved. I mean, he was an engineer, but he'd taken off to take his son. And I wasn't doing it because I felt sorry for him. It's just not that big a deal to me.
I'm interested, how did those concealed handgun license carriers differ in voir dire in a case that involved a weapon?
Well, we didn't give it a great focus because the facts of the case are not one that matters about a weapon. Because the person wasn't carrying a weapon. The weapon was in the home and it was a shotgun.
Okay.
So, that's different anyway. A shotgun is a whole different animal. It's not even carrying a weapon. It wasn't like something that happened in the street or happened randomly or like a robbery or anything like that. It was more domestic.
I see what you're saying, because I would be intrigued to see if the people that had the concealed handgun license, for example, if you had a case where maybe there was a self-defense element.
Oh, if it's a self-defense, I've had those.
If it's those a self-defense, jurors might be your best folks.
Oh, yeah. No, if it's a self-defense issue, they're good with it. If it's a self-defense with strangers or acquaintances, not lovers, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they're good for that.
And so one of the things that I took away from these 3 felony trials kind of in a short period of time is, number one, you better be ready to defend yourself all the way to the end and testify. And number 2, you and your lawyer better be willing to own whatever stereotype applies to you and get it out in the open, because it's going to be a factor.
Right. Well, let's take another call. Thank you for calling Truth and Justice with Vivian King, and please make your comment.
Yeah, good evening. And he's right for our stereotypes being a factor in cases, which is really crazy. What happened? It really happened. It was in Missouri. Ferguson, Missouri, is where a young man got killed this week, and then a couple days later, it happened in L.A. This is the thing. Regardless, we're in 2014, and to me, it's just ludicrous, and it's just crazy that they keep killing these young brothers, keep killing them and keep killing them. No weapons, no aggressive behavior, and then they try to fabricate these lies. But one thing that's good about it now is that we do have cameras everywhere.
Absolutely.
Like with this particular case, they don't want to even let the information out. Or how many times he shot this boy? He shot him because of it started over jaywalking, and he stole a cigar or something like that, and then he executed this young man like that.
And I was told, I haven't had much chance to listen to the news because I'm in a capital murder trial, but I heard the young man had his hands up. Is that what you heard also?
He did. He had his hands up from what I understand also. And he shot him several times, like 10 times. 10 times. And it's just like, I don't think in this country it'll ever be justice for the brother.
And the thing that's hurtful, and the thing that's hurtful to me is that, and what I hope happens, I hope someone captured it on camera, and I also hope that police officer is fired, and whatever money needs to be paid to the family, they settle it. Because we need to own our mistakes too and realize people need jobs and we need good policemen. We have so many great policemen, and to be hurt as an occupation behind a few bad cops is bad. That's what I hate when the city defends these cops that do something wrong. If the investigation proves that it was wrong and you wouldn't want that to happen to your child, then take the right action. A lot of us get fired from jobs or have to do different jobs just because we did a bad job, not because we killed anyone. I mean, killing someone is the worst thing that can happen to you, and do it swiftly. I mean, I think they should just handle it. I mean, that cop that shot Robbie Tolan, which one of the callers called in and talked about, the Bel Air young man that's laying on the ground and they're manhandling his mother at his house. I mean, that was just wrong.
Why don't they tase people? They have tasers. I mean,
And let me tell you what's scary about tasers to me is if an officer has a gun on one side and a taser on the other, they can very well pick up the wrong thing. I just don't like that to me. I mean,
yeah, well,
and it's happened.
I would rather someone be tased than be killed is
Yeah, me
my
too.
only point.
Me
and
too.
I don't understand, and you know, I'd love for someone in law enforcement to explain this to me, but I don't understand what creates a situation where one person's life, their life, is risked.
I don't understand it either.
I mean, if you're jaywalking, or like the caller said, if
Let
it's
him
a
go.
cigar,
Leave him alone.
who cares?
Who cares?
Have a bigger view than that.
Yeah.
One more quick thing. I think he should be prosecuted as a homicide, not just okay. He get fired. I think he needs to be put.
Oh, I agree.
Prosecuted, and if the law is death by, if it's by death, I think that's what I think he needs to be held accountable for all his actions.
But the first step needs to be that he gets fired. And, you know, a lot of times these officers don't get fired. And one of the things that I think they're fussing about with this officer is that the police department won't release his personnel file, because the suspicion is that he had complaints of police brutality or violation of people's civil rights in his personnel file. That's what I heard on the news this morning. They won't release that information. And it should be public information because the public pays the salary of the police officer. So it is our responsibility to have it. Now, they could lie behind some legal umbrella by saying that, you know, it's being investigated and money needs to be paid out or whatever civil legal lawsuits could happen. But they really need to let us know what happened on that case. But I agree with you. But part of what happens is it's difficult to prosecute police officers, as we know, in the criminal justice system, because the people who come to jury duty who say they can be fair and impartial are the ones who sometimes have an agenda who never find cops guilty. We have 1 minute. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you for calling, and please call us next week. I have about 4 shows lined up. If you see a rerun, it's because my live guest didn't show up, but I'm here every Wednesday. Thank you for calling. So I want you to have the last word. We have like 1 minute is what I'm getting the notice of, and tell me what you think the moral to the story is tonight.
I think the moral to the story is be honest with yourself, be honest with others, and those of us who believe things have to stand up. And it's not just every time there's an election. Go to jury duty, be involved in your community, whether it's through community leaders like yourself, whether it's through your church. We have got to have our voice heard. If not, it will be stomped out.
I agree with Billy Skinner tonight. Thank you, Billy, for being my guest, for volunteering your time. I know
Thank
you have
for having me.
Small children and a wife, so it's a sacrifice to work all day and to come and share stories so that we may be enlightened and educated. So I appreciate you for doing this.
Thank you for having this show.
Hopefully you'll do it again before the year's out.
I will.
Thank you again for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. Good night. Thank you for tuning in again. Tonight we have something really good, a hot topic in the news this week. He's been charged with crime. This is a show where I try to educate real stories. Thank you for tuning in again. Tonight we have something really good.